Sta frullando.
Io non devo fare nulla, no?
Ok, we are live. We are live. Good evening, Dr. Di Marzo.
Good
How are
evening.
you? Where you are?
I'm fine. I'm okay, and I'm in Quebec City in the province of Quebec in Canada. Right.
Fantastic. Fantastic. It seems a really sunny day there.
Today, yes, it's sunny and cold, of course, but it's sunny. It's a beautiful day.
How many degrees are there? Not in Fahrenheit, please. Celsius, since
No,
you are a scientist.
they use Celsius here too. It goes from minus 15 to 4 degrees these days. So, and every day is different. So you cannot really say before before it happens. You just have to be there and try it and experience it.
Wow, I wouldn't really like to be there. I'm in the warm Italy.
It's a beautiful place.
Okay, so I have to introduce you, and I'm sorry, but I have to read your introduction because otherwise I think I would be lost and I don't want to say anything wrong. So, okay, Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo is the Canada Excellence Researcher on the microbiome, endocannabinoid and axis in metabolic health at Laval University in Canada, and Associate Research Director at the Institute of Biomolecular Chemistry of the National Research Council in Naples, Italy. Okay, done. I just want to start with the question that we collected from our members. And the first one that I really find very interesting is what are the steps that motivated you to move to London for your PhD many, many years ago? It was not so common as it is maybe now. I don't want you to feel, I want to make you feel old, actually. But
Well, yes, it was exactly 36 years ago when in fact, almost 37 years ago when I moved to London to do my PhD. In fact, when I moved to London, that was only in Naples, at the University of Naples, where I was coming from. It was only the second round of the doctorate, the PhD system. It was really a long time ago. And in fact, when I moved to London, I didn't even know I was moving to London. I was there to stay for 1 year. And then I was offered the possibility to do a PhD. After 1 year I was there, and to make up for the year that had gone. So I managed to do it in 3 years and a half. And it happened quite by chance, I must say. My thesis tutor had some contacts at Imperial College. At that time, it used to be known as Imperial College of Science and Technology, and then it became Imperial College of Science, Technology, and Medicine. So I graduated in chemistry, and I did a thesis at the University of Naples in biochemistry. So I went there at the Department of Biochemistry at Imperial College, and I liked it there. London in those days was an amazing place to be, and so I decided to stay for 3 years and a half in the end, and I really liked it, and I think I did a good thing. But as you say, it's true that those times were quite different. There was no internet, so when you left, you left. You only had your telephones, and the telephones were not the kind of telephones that we have now. There was no other way of connecting with your family, and it was a kind of adventure, more adventurous than it is now, and it used to be one adventure it used to be at least until a year ago, and now it's become adventures again, but for different reasons. So it was fun, and I could really work hard for 3.5 years and really build up my career on those years.
okay, so going back to those years, what's the advice would you give to your 20-year-old self and then to your 40-year-old self?
Yeah, that's. I wish one could go back in time and do things slightly differently. But I must say that I was 23 years old when I went to London the first time, and I honestly don't have advice for that guy. I think I was lucky enough to do the right choices at that age. Maybe coming back to Italy was not so much of a good choice in retrospect, because I felt that I had to go back to Italy. The Italian government that paid for my education and I had to give back. That was my feeling. I must say that things in research these years were not as bad as they are now, and so, in retrospect, maybe I should have stayed in London. I was offered the possibility after my PhD studentship to stay in London, but I really wanted to go back to Italy. So I think I did the right thing, both to go there and coming back and going back to Italy. To my 40 years old, well, maybe at that time I should have known better. And I was still young when I was 40 years old, and I could have decided maybe to go away. It's very sad. I know I'm speaking to an audience of students that left Italy to go and work abroad with the hope to go back to Italy. But I must say, now I'm 60 years old. I've kind of have some second thought about the idea of going back to Italy, because it's if you really want to do research, it's really hard, and it's hard not so much because there is not enough funds to do research, but because there is too much bureaucracy, and that's really the two things together. It makes life almost impossible. So after my 40th my 40th birthday, in fact, I decided that it was time to move and travel again, and I started traveling back and forth from Italy to different universities, and I found the kind of the energy of going back to Italy and to do well also in Italy. But
Okay.
40 years old, maybe I should have made different choices.
Okay. Thank you for your advice, really. And so we can start with talking about what you really study and what you are known for in the science world. So how would you introduce what do you study and are you currently studying at the moment, or your main discovery?
Well, when I did my PhD in London, I was working on some lipids that act as chemical signals. In that case, it was it was relevant to the respiratory system and to asthma. So that experience in working with lipids that were not just at that time, lipids were still considered only as a source of energy, but they were becoming known to be signals, chemical signals for intercellular and intracellular communication. So that the experience really helped me, because then when I got the opportunity a few years after I returned to Italy to start working on a new family of lipids, the endocannabinoids, I jumped on it. I thought I had the right expertise and know-how to deal with these complex molecules. And so since then, since basically 1988, 1990, I've been working on the endocannabinoids. The endocannabinoids are the endogenous ligands of the receptors that are also activated by THC. THC is the major, if only psychotropic component of marijuana and cannabis. So these receptors were discovered by others in those years, and I had the opportunity to work on the endogenous ligands of these receptors. And in fact, I thought of this name endocannabinoids by analogy with the endorphins that had been discovered a few years before, the endogenous ligands of the opioid receptors. So the name actually stuck quite well, and it's widely used to this day. So I started working on developing analytical techniques to measure endocannabinoids in tissues, in plasma, in biological fluids of any kind. And I developed, we with my team, we started working on the biosynthesis and the degradation of these compounds. And so I can say that my career is started when I started working on the endogenous counterparts of the plant cannabinoids, and that posed some problems. Every time I went to conferences and speak about the endocannabinoids, I had to hear some jokes about cannabis, but it became quite clear at the beginning that cannabis and cannabinoids are quite different from the endocannabinoids. So I could find a way
Yeah.
of bypassing this kind of ionic smiles and things I had when I talked about them.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, and I know there are there are several, controversial statements and beliefs around this topic. And talking about this, what is the one common myth about your professional field, so about cannabis and marijuana, that you want to debunk?
Well, there's many, unfortunately, because this is one of those topics everybody thinks can speak about, both in scientific terms and in political terms, and often the two things get mixed together. You find the advocates of cannabis use describing all the miracles that cannabis and cannabinoids can make. You find those that are completely against the use of cannabinoids and cannabis, and so cannabis is the culprit for most disgusting behaviors and everything. So obviously, I never wanted to go into the political controversies. The myths, there is many myths. The first myth is that cannabis and cannabinoids are the same thing. In fact, and marijuana, in fact, and cannabinoids are the same thing. In fact, there is more than 100 cannabinoids in the cannabis plants, and only one of them is psychoactive. So there is only one compound that is basically responsible for the euphoric and recreational uses of marijuana and cannabis. And even among the cannabis plants, there is a lot of variety. Not all cannabis plants make THC in sufficient amounts to cause any psychotropic actions. So cannabis and cannabinoids are not just one thing, but there are many of them. And obviously, the other myth is that the cannabinoids are the same things as the endocannabinoids. So since we are producing cannabis, basically, this is the myth. So we can use as much cannabis as we want. In fact, as I was mentioned before, plant cannabinoids are quite different, and THC in particular is quite different from the endocannabinoids. They have in common the fact that they bind to the same receptors, but they do it in completely different ways. And the endocannabinoids, in fact, do also other things. And of course, endocannabinoids are regulated, whereas the consumption of cannabis can be dysregulated. So it's not that because we have an endocannabinoid system, we can consume as much cannabis and cannabinoids and THC as we like. But obviously, now people are getting more acknowledged with these differences, and it's becoming easier with the time. And of course, there is a lot of these myths that have been already debunked, and I hope in the future there would be more drugs, therapeutic drugs, not just recreational drugs, made out of the cannabinoids, of the plant cannabinoids.
Clear. Yeah, we hope to. We hope for it, and yeah, clear. So I'm talking about the positive side of cannabinoids. So which are the possible benefits of cannabinoids for people? So how can our listeners start using them for a precise purpose? Is there an everyday actionable usage of them?
I would say no to this last question, because obviously I believe, and like me, many others working on the same topic, that cannabinoids are a bit like medicines. So you cannot really take medicines every day. I'm talking about the therapeutic use of cannabinoids. The therapeutic use of THC has been somehow hindered by the psychoactivity of THC. It's difficult to separate the beneficial effects of THC from the recreational effects, which are unwanted in a patient. But there are many other cannabinoids, as I was mentioning, and most of them have no psychoactivity. Therefore, they're more druggable than THC. These cannabinoids, one example is, cannabidiol, have many molecular mechanisms of action. So they, unlike THC, which only acts on the cannabinoid receptors, the other cannabinoids have many more targets. So they're more difficult to investigate from a molecular point of view, but they're probably more promising as therapeutic drugs. And in fact, the only two cannabinoids that are being that have been basically accepted as therapeutic drugs to be sold not just as galenic drugs, but as real therapeutic drugs after years and years of clinical trials, both contain cannabidiol. And one of them is currently being used in United States and Europe against pediatric epilepsy, and the other preparation based on botanical cannabinoids has been used against some symptoms of multiple sclerosis. So mostly neurological disorders, but there is also many studies ongoing to investigate their potential use in neuropsychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, metabolic disorders, cancer, in oncology. THC is already used and accepted drug for some symptoms of cancer, such as weight loss in people undergoing chemotherapy, or in patients with HIV, with AIDS, also for the same reason, to put on weight, or to reduce the nausea of some chemotherapeutic agents. So, but this is really niche use of cannabinoids. We and many others are trying to understand whether we can have cannabinoids to be used for larger populations. And as you were mentioning, yes, I do believe that some cannabinoids can be used as therapeutic drugs for other disorders as well, apart from those that are already being targeted by these cannabidiol-containing preparations. But it's real therapeutic drugs. Then there is, of course, the anecdotal use of the cannabis plants, cannabis preparations, oils, various extracts. And this is more complicated because, these are difficult compounds to work with. They're not so easy absorbed by our organism. So it takes a special formulation for them to be administered in a very reproducible way. As a pharmacologist and biochemist, I cannot accept so easily that people self-medicate based on anecdotal reports. Of course, when this is the only possibility, I can understand it. But I still think we need to make an effort to try to understand whether we can make of these natural compounds real therapeutic drugs that are controlled, tested in a clinical trial, and administered to the right people for the right disease.
Clear. Yeah, I absolutely agree on the last point. So, on top of everything you said, absolutely about the last point, because I know there are many people that follow, homeopathy, and they try to self-medicate every day. Maybe, try to informing themselves on the internet, and sometimes they make things worsen.
Yeah.
So,
or when things work, and sometimes that one day they work and the other day they don't work. So, for example, in the case of cannabidiol, it started because in epilepsy, it started because it was known from anecdotal reports are very important. Good researcher needs to know how to fish the right ones. It was known that cannabidiol could help for epilepsy. So some parents of epileptic children in California started giving preparations of cannabis, of those cannabis varieties that are rich in cannabidiol and very poor in THC, and they saw it worked. But some days it worked, some other days it didn't work. With some children it worked, with some other children did not work or not work so well. So that's when they went to the pharmaceutical industry and said, look, we've done this. And the pharmaceutical industry developed a product which is always the same and which works in most cases. Of course, there are always responders and non-responders for any medicine, but at least we know what we're giving.
Yeah. A few years ago, I read an article about cannabis helping with fat loss, actually. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, there's many papers, many studies. This is mostly epidemiological studies, so studies in which some phenomena are analyzed after that many people have treated themselves, or they've taken marijuana, or they've taken cannabinoids in one way or the other, and they go and ask these people, what was the effect they had. So this is kind of a posteriori studies. They're not real clinical trials, but it's true that it's now well accepted that people taking marijuana or cannabinoids for recreational purposes for many years are less prone to get type 2 diabetes and to get obesity. And this is quite paradoxical because everybody knows that THC stimulates food intake. And one of the major roles of the cannabinoid receptors of type 1, which are very abundant in the brain, is to stimulate food intake. So people were surprised to see this. People were thinking that it was the other way around. This is also why THC is used to induce body weight and to reduce anorexia in oncologic patients. But the reason probably for that is that when you take THC for many years, many weeks in a row, the receptors that is supposed to stimulate food intake, and in fact it does, because the first side effect in young people who smoke marijuana is the munchies, is to want to eat something palatable. In those people who take it for many years, probably the receptors gets in some way inactivated. So since this is a receptor for THC, which stimulates food intake and stimulates a gain of weight, when you inactivate it through repeated use, you get the opposite effect. And so people believe that the reason why people smoking marijuana or taking cannabinoids for other reasons, but mostly recreational purposes, are less prone to develop metabolic disorders. But I still wouldn't take cannabis to lose weight, because obviously this is more of kind of a preventive effect rather than a curative effect. And as I said, when you take cannabis, you're messing up with the endocannabinoid system. You're not really activating in the right way, because you activate it everywhere in the body and not necessarily at the right time in the right place.
So basically, the mechanism you were explaining is similar to the insulin resistant that many people know.
Yeah,
Right?
it's actually it's similar, but it's with opposite effects. Because when you get insulin resistant, you usually mess up your metabolism, so you are obese or overweight. It's a very common mechanism for many chemical signals that, when given, especially through exogenous administration of compounds that mimic the action of the endogenous signals, they desensitize, they inactivate their receptors. So this is true for rather than insulin. Insulin is more complex because insulin has a very complicated. There is one way through which insulin is working well, and there is one way through which insulin is not working well. It's the same receptors but different signaling pathways. It's similar to what happens to the leptin receptor. Leptin is an anorectic hormone produced by the fat, by the adipose tissue. But for some reason in obesity, there is an overproduction of leptin obviously by the adipose tissue. So leptin that travels to the brain desensitizes the receptor in the part of the brain that controls appetite. So instead of inhibiting food intake, you end up losing the inhibitory effect of leptin and eating more rather than less. So yes, it's you're right. It's a quite well spread phenomenon for chemical signals. When they are overproduced for pathological reasons, they start desensitizing their mechanism of action.
Okay. So talking about another role of cannabis, does cannabis have a position, a role in the management of COVID-19?
Yeah, well, this is a problem. This is one of the problems of scientific research all over the world. People remember about doing things only when it's too late. Clearly, now everybody's worried about COVID-19, so everybody wants to give money to research to work on COVID-19. And I say, okay, there is COVID-19, but there's also other things. And it's good to give money to research, because in this way we know already, we have already the knowledge, not during an emergency time, but before the emergency happens. the other problem with COVID-19 is that now everything is good for COVID-19. So we have to be very careful when we say that something is good for COVID-19. There have been several examples in the press of natural compounds or other drugs developed for other reasons that could be good for COVID-19. When we talk about COVID-19, we talk about two problems. One is the infection, and the other one is the consequences of the infection. For the infection, the only things are antivirals or vaccination or immunity in general. So even if you get immunity in a natural way, because you're lucky enough to get COVID-19 without any symptoms or anything, that's the best way. Antivirals, I always say that we should really have more antivirals. There is very few antivirals in the market. When a new virus comes up, we don't know how to fight it, if not by waiting 12, 18 months to get a vaccine. The consequences of COVID-19 is really what caused mortality. So this cytokine storm, this strong inflammation of the lungs, the pneumonia, like many other anti-inflammatory compounds, also cannabinoids are strongly, they produce a strongly anti-inflammatory action, and they do so in a multi-target way. So they have different ways of producing anti-inflammatory effects. So in principle, yes, you can use cannabinoids, particularly cannabidiol, for example, to fight inflammation, but it's never been done. So I would say that cannabinoids are as good as any other anti-inflammatory drugs, and we know already that there are many anti-inflammatory drugs that do not work, that do not prevent, for example, aged people with COVID-19 to develop pneumonia. So I think more research needs to be done, and I hope it's done because, as I said, cannabidiol is a very promising. If I could say something about cannabidiol, is that it's a strong anti-inflammatory compound. On the other hand, I can also say that it's a difficult compound. You need very high doses because it's not easily absorbed by the body. So again, if you get COVID-19, don't go and smoke marijuana, first of all, because in marijuana there isn't necessarily a lot of cannabidiol, and THC could also be pro-inflammatory, so be careful. And you know, cannabidiol at this stage, to this date, cannabinoids can be as good as any other anti-inflammatory compound, and we know already that there have been failures. So far, the only strongly anti-inflammatory compound that seems to have been successful against the consequences of COVID-19, the bad ones, is dexamethasone, which is a corticosteroid. So again, strongly anti-inflammatory, strongly multi-mechanism of action, but that has been tested. So we know that it can work. For the cannabinoids, we don't know.
Okay. And how has COVID-19 influenced your work so far?
Oh my God! Do you have another question? Reservoir question. Well, I think this is bad for everybody, but it's particularly bad for the students. You know, this question actually ties very well with your first question. I was wondering a few days ago, because I do have quite a few students, especially here in Canada, what would have happened if something like of this sort had happened when I was a student 36 years ago. And that would have been very, very bad, obviously. But on the other hand, these days is also perhaps in some ways worse, because people know that they could do a lot of things and they cannot do them. And don't tell me that for active research, for bench work research, you can work in remote, because this is not possible. And even for us professors and directors of research, is very complicated to manage research without seeing, I don't say every day, but at least once a week, our students. So it's bad for the students. Some students had to leave to go, I think this was your case too, to go abroad and could not leave. And I thought, oh my God, what if I could have, you know, if something had happened when I was 23 years old that prevented me to leave, you know, my whole career would have been completely different. And so, yes, it's affecting it. It's mostly affecting the students. For us, old ones is bad, but is not as bad. I feel I'm afraid that some students are losing some opportunities here, and not to speak about the fact that they're not able to go to university and to attend courses and lessons in person, because if you ask for my opinion, and you didn't ask it, but if you ask for my opinion, I don't think that on the long run, having lessons in remote and giving lessons in remote works. I participated to several conferences this last year, and it's not good. I mean, yeah, we make an effort. We know we have to do it, but most people know that it's not the same thing. I really hope that there is nobody around here in the world now thinking that even when COVID-19 will be finished, we can go on ahead. We can go ahead like this because it's cheaper, because it's easier, because it's yes, probably less polluting, but it's also completely ineffective. So I really hope that it's finished and we go back to the usual way of working and teaching and training students.
Yeah, I'm thinking now about your particular work without having the possibility to do research. It's absolutely not useless, but there is a huge part that misses from your everyday routine, actually.
Well, I'll give you specific examples. The first 5 or 6 months, what we did was to analyze all the data that we had accumulated and we had not yet had the time to look at. So we looked at the data, we discussed them, of course, in remote. We started writing papers. So we actually were even more productive than usual because we published quite a few papers last year and this year. But this was old stuff. So when the new research was really not done until September, October, and really now everything is delayed of at least 6-8 months. But clearly, if you do biological medical research, you have to work in the lab, you have to do the experiments with your hands, you have to follow the students. So there have been delays in the delivery of materials that are necessary to carry out research, because also the industries who are producing these materials are being delayed. So there have been plenty of problems, and being capable as we are today, to give seminars and webinars and stuff like that hasn't improved things, because after a while you get sick and tired of that. So it must finish, and it must finish soon. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble.
Yes. So yeah, talking about the future, so that we try to squeeze a bit of positivity in this conversation.
Yes, of course.
Which are your future projects or something that you'd really like to accomplish in the next 5-10 years, COVID permitting?
COVID permitting, yes. Well, at my age, leaving Italy again to even though only partly, because I'm still going to Italy. I still have my position there, so I can follow both laboratories in some ways. But leaving for this new adventure for me was really the accomplishment of an old dream, because I always liked the idea of working in Canada. I think it's a wonderful country to work in, devoid of the really bad competitivity and competitiveness that it's in the United States. So I really, what I wanted is to continue a little bit the work of developing new therapeutic drugs, working on dirty materials. Cannabis can be considered as a dirty materials, because everybody speaks about making drugs, therapeutic drugs out of cannabis, but so far only few people managed. It's a difficult material. Another difficult material is the gut microbiome. So basically, I got this opportunity to work on the potential relationship between the endocannabinoids, which are endogenous signals, and the gut microbiome. This is the microflora we have in our gastrointestinal system, and it helps us in many ways. When it's the right one, when it's the correct, healthy microbiome, it helps us in ways that are go really beyond our imagination. Initially, it was thought it was only helping us with our metabolism or with our immune system. We now know that it affects our behavior, it affects our brain as well through the gut-brain axis. So it's really an ideal exogenous symbiotic system in our body that plays many of the roles physiologically and pathologically that the endocannabinoid system does. So the idea was to put the two things together, to try to understand whether the endocannabinoid system controls the microbiome and whether the microbiome controls the endocannabinoid system, with the idea of developing again new therapies coming from the gut microbiota, understanding the chemical signals that are used by the gut microbiome to communicate with our body and to try to mimic their actions by making drugs. This has been done already. Everybody knows about the prebiotics, the probiotics, but we need to do it now in a more accurate way by identifying really the chemicals that are doing the job. So I hope that COVID-19 will not curb these dreams and making. I want to make an example. I mean, it sounds a bit strange, but in fact, the gut microbiota has already been used as a drug because a lot of experiments are ongoing on the so-called fecal microbiota transfer. So for some disorders, such as, for example, the fight against some bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, a transfer of a fecal microbiota preparation, obviously purified and done so we're talking about the fecal matter here, can be given to the patient, and in 90% of the cases this helps him or her fighting the antibiotic resistant bacteria in the gut that they can develop, for example, after a stay in the hospital or after taking for a long time some antibiotics. So clearly the fecal matter, it's a really dirty matter, but it contains mostly gut microbes that are producing chemicals that can help us fight disorders. And this is a typical example. Of course, it would be much better, also psychologically speaking, if we could purify some of these chemicals rather than giving them and administering them through the fecal matter. So again, it's one challenge to try to develop some medicines from a very complex matter, which is the gut microbiota, and to do that in humans, we need to start from the human microbiota, and the best way to start from the human microbiota is the human fecal matter from the healthy individual. So this is something also we're trying to do in relation with the endocannabinoid system. I hope I was clear. But again, this is a bit like cannabis. Everybody speaks these days about the gut microbiota and the promises, how promising it can be for the treatment of several disorders.
Yeah, I've already heard about it, and it sounds super interesting because sometimes, they say that actually our gut is our second brain. And I read an article about the gut microbiota talking about how controlling and being fully able to control this microbiota can really be life-changing.
Yeah. Friend of mine, a brilliant scientist, Patrice Cani, he always says when he starts his presentations at conferences, in gut we trust. So definitely the gut has many surprises to be discovered through the gut microbiota, and it's well connected to the rest of the body and the brain, through the brain.
Okay, so now we open our Q&A session. I see a question. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. If you can read it, I will read it.
What do I need to press?
Okay. How long do you think it's going to be? Okay. Yeah, how long do you think it's going to be before medical marijuana will be legalized in most countries? And why do you think it's not already happening?
Well, it's happening in many states of the United States, in some countries. Even the recreational use of cannabis is now happening in some countries, including Canada, for example. I don't know why it's not happening. I think the reason why it's not happening is there is too much politics around it and too little science. When there is politics around a scientific issue, this means that if there is a government who has certain way of thinking, then this can go through. If there is a government with a different way of thinking, this is blocked. So the best way to accept new therapies is science. So we need to understand what is medical marijuana. Medical marijuana means probably THC. Then, if it means THC, it's difficult. It's difficult. It's a difficult compound. It's difficult to make it into a drug as it is. It is already accepted as a drug by the FDA and other countries, but only for a limited number of disorders. And for a limited number of patients. If medical marijuana is the other cannabinoids, then it's probably easier, and it's now known that some of these cannabinoids can help for a higher number of people. So when it will be demonstrated by, if not clinical trials, but at least by more evidence, scientific evidence that cannabinoids, more and more cannabinoids can be useful for more and more pathological conditions, then we will not be talking about medical marijuana anymore, but we're talking about medical cannabinoids and the best way to get them in a reproducible way. And when I say reproducible, I mean it's not only the source of what we're taking, but also the reproducibility of the route of administration. So if smoking, for example, is not a good route of administration because it causes other problems. So clearly you need the pill, you need an oral preparation. And sometimes this has been difficult to do with cannabinoids. So I think there are too many questions, too few studies conducted in the right way. And this has justified those who are out of principle, bad principle against it, to deny this possibility, whereas this has justified others to give this possibility, but in an indiscriminate manner.
Okay, I don't see any other relevant question actually. So I think that we are 43 minutes, 42, 43 minutes in, and I think we are cool. We are done.
Yeah, Filippo, you can give my email to anybody who asks if they have more questions. I usually there is one. Oh no, this is you. Oh no.
Here this okay. One of the member collecting the question.
Oh yeah, this is
So
a very
Giorgio asks, do you think that schools should provide some webinars, lectures to educate young people on the advantages and disadvantages of cannabis?
absolutely yes, absolutely yes. Schools, especially because people think okay, medical marijuana. This means that it's good for you, so we can smoke it as much as we want. And one thing we know now that we did not know 10 or 15 years ago is that chronic use of THC in an adolescent can be very, very bad. So THC is probably not producing serious side effects in an adult population, but in children, so we're talking about, or even in lactating mothers or in pregnant mothers, can be very dangerous for the development of the brain, because THC is interacting with the receptors that are deeply involved in the development of the brain, so it can mess things up. So we need to educate the children in the scholar age, especially between 10 and 15, because they are the ones more sensitive to the recreational use of cannabis. And now there is not just cannabis around. There is spice drugs which contain synthetic molecules that are between 10 and 50 times more potent than THC. So they can really produce dramatic effects. So we really need to educate school children and teachers and parents maybe also to these problems. Knowledge is always the best way. Then you decide, but at least you decide by knowing the right
You're
thing.
taking
Yeah.
a knowledgeable decision at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. I just want to see if there are other questions. I don't think there will be other question coming. And so you were saying that you can be contacted through your email. We will put your email in the show notes so that everybody who is interested in in contacting you can find you. And I also watch so many interesting videos in which you speak on YouTube. They're a bit controversial, but I really like them.
Yes.
Okay, I see another
My
question
mind.
from.
I try to speak my mind. Yeah,
I
there
see
is.
another question from
Yeah,
Chiara.
this is the
I
problem
will.
with the online. The questions pop up only after a few minutes for some reason.
Chiara asks, what can scientists and the media do to help in fastening the legalization of medical marijuana?
Uh, Spreading knowledge, speaking with the right people who have done work on cannabinoids. When we're talking about medical marijuana, we're talking about cannabinoids because these are the compounds that are present only in cannabis. There is in cannabis many other natural compounds that are present in many other plants, but so specifically medical marijuana for me means medical cannabinoids. And again, making people understand that marijuana is a very heterogeneous matter. So your marijuana is different from my marijuana. Your cannabis preparation is different from mine and from that of many others. Even if you are cultivating it your own, it's something completely different. So you're changing what you're taking. It's not always the same thing. It may look as if it's always the same thing because it produces the similar psychotropic effect, but this is only one of the compounds that produces the psychotropic effect. All the others, their proportions can change. And the medical activities are probably not due uniquely, if at all, to THC, but they are due to the other cannabinoids. So maybe we don't want medical marijuana. We want uh, preparations from the cannabis plants that contain more of the other cannabinoids and that they make them always in the same amount in a way that we know that if we take them, they're getting to our body in the right place, always in the same concentration, in the same dose. So it's really important that rather than beating ourselves for legalization of medical marijuana, we struggle and we convince the media that the cannabinoids in the cannabis plant are worthwhile investigating for their clinical medical applications.
Clear, crystal clear.
Thank you.
I just want to see. I can hide this one. I think this one was the last one. Otherwise, they would have put other one in the chat.
I hope that
So
the students that are writing from the University of Westminster are actually in London, and because
I don't think
I've been there. So
I don't think so.
yeah. Well,
Actually,
I wish you to go there.
yeah, it's quite a strange situation. Speaking about myself, I'm like doing my Erasmus in Copenhagen by being here in Italy. So I moved two countries without moving from Italy in 1 year. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. Let's hope for the best.
I hope that you also feel sorry for yourself a little bit because that means that there is still hope for the future. Let's not get adapted to this situation. We should really fight against those who think. Today I spent what was supposed to be a 15-minute survey. It lasted for 30 minutes. Inquiring about all the different aspects of working in remote, and I feel raising around me the feeling that maybe when COVID-19 is finished, we can keep on like this or partly like this. No, you never convinced me about that. We need to go back exactly as we were. Only we can use these means only for those populations who have no money to travel, for those people who don't have the possibilities to travel. Then yes, it was good to develop these means. But for those who have the possibility to travel, we cannot use this surrogate.
Yeah, but I think that those people who prefer, the online learning are in a clear minority because, yeah, sometimes we say, yeah, people are not, capable anymore to socialize, but that's not true. Humans are social animals.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, I really miss the, even though I can
millennium evolution for humans not to become social animals. Yeah.
No,
Probably,
not exactly. To
probably
live in
millions
a
of years.
room. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, I
Okay.
think that we are good, and
Thank you
thank
very
you very
much.
much
Thank you.
for your.
This is a nice initiative you have here. I really appreciate it. It's really nice. I'm sorry if the image was not good because today there is too much sun in Canada. I'm sorry.
Lucky you, lucky you.
Well, I'm inside anyway. Okay.
Okay,
Nice speaking to you, and
nice, nice
good
to speak
luck.
to you, Dr. Di Marzo. Thank you
Good
very
luck.
much. Good luck for your search.
Thank you very much.